Good morning. This interview is brought to you by the University of Alabama in Huntsville's Humanities Center. I'm Amber Laxson, a graduate student in the Department of History, and today I'll be interviewing Dr. Ussama Makdisi, Professor of History and the first holder of the Arab American Educational Foundation Chair of Arab Studies at Rice University, and author of the recent book, Age of Coexistence, the Ecumenical Frame and the Making of the Modern Arab World. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Makdisi, for allowing me to talk to you today about your book and for spending so much time with us here at UAH.
It's a pleasure to be here and to be with you.
It's awesome. So the first question I wanted to ask is, your book starts with the first line, "Every history of sectarianism is also a history of coexistence." What do you mean here, and why did you choose to start your book with this line?
I think because it summarizes the argument pretty well, which is to say, the way the Arab world, the Arab East, the Middle East has been viewed and represented and thought of, especially in the West, but not just in the West, also now, unfortunately, in the Arab world itself, is as a place of endless violence, sectarianism, religious feuding, hatreds, and so on. And I realized very quickly, there's also another history, which goes along exactly with that, which contests that history, which is the history of opposition to that, coexistence, solidarity, secular solidarity, ecumenical solidarity, and so on and so forth. Just like in the US, you have racism, but you also have anti-racism. So too, in other parts of the world, you have sectarianism, but you also have anti-sectarianism. So in other words, there is a fundamental problem, but there's also people who are fighting to overcome that problem. So it depends on where you want to put the emphasis.
Right. Okay, so a follow-up to that question is, I know you're related to the great Edward Said, who wrote Orientalism. Did this have any impact or influence on you in writing Age of Coexistence?
Yes. Edward was my uncle, but of course, he obviously had a huge impact on my career, as he has had on many others, and on my thinking, as have, to be fair to my parents and my family. It's not just Edward, but obviously Edward had a huge impact. I mean, his work was pioneering, was groundbreaking. Was above all, I think, intellectually brave and daring, and he sort of blazed the way for many others to follow. But having said that, and of course, so I'm always grateful to first for having known Edward and having not just because he's family, but also just intellectually being inspired by Edward, but also the Edward Said, but also, of course, there's the Edward's great project was, of course, to work on deconstructing and criticizing and humanizing the Middle East by deconstructing the extraordinarily racist Orientalist representations, the web of knowledge that was created to sort of envelop the Middle East, so to speak, and to sort of to dehumanize people. So he did a huge amount of work in terms of creating the framework. And then the question was always, okay, so who's going to actually do the work on the ground in the region to actually create, because Edward always said he never taught a class on the Middle East. So remember his specialization, his work was on literature and on representations and on culture, and on the relationship between culture and imperialism. But he always was very candid about the fact that he didn't teach the Middle East, and he didn't actually, he wasn't, someone who devoted all his time to working on the Middle East. And so there was ample room to both appreciate what Edward did and also then work on basically in the footsteps of that kind of project to basically humanize and historicize the region, which it's in desperate need of, because there's so much willful misrepresentation of the Arab world, of Arabs, of Muslims, until today.
Absolutely agree with that. So your book is filled with many thinkers and intellectuals. Is there a certain intellectual or part of the book that is your favorite, and why?
No, I mean, you said you're a graduate student, right? So
Yes.
I assume you have not written the book yet.
No.
But when
No.
you do, as I'm sure you will, or at least when you write your dissertation, you'll see that every book project, I mean, the way authors write, at least the way I write, I'll speak for myself, is that this is a cohesive, coherent project that comes together in its final form, in the shape of obviously this book.
Mhm.
And so each chapter, to me, of course, makes sense, and it's related to what follows.
Right.
And so I think of them as a whole, and I don't really think of one chapter as somehow more important than the previous chapter. But I think they're all important to me, and all the thinkers in there. I mean, the truth of the matter is that it's an incredibly there's so many figures I wasn't able to cover, and
Mhm.
there's so many aspects I'm not able to cover in describing a modern culture of coexistence, what I call the ecumenical frame. This idea of transcending, recognizing and embracing, but also trying to transcend religious difference without being necessarily antagonistic to religious difference. That's hence ecumenism. And there's a huge space for all sorts of work and angles and individuals and societies and communities that I wasn't able to focus on. But I really thought of this book as a first step towards shifting the agenda away from the obsessive concern with sectarianism and saying, okay, but there's a whole other world of people who fought against this. Let's focus on these people
Right.
and try to understand where they fit in what is an extraordinary history that's underappreciated.
Absolutely. So my last and final question for you is, what's next? What is your next project that you're currently working on?
I wish I could answer that. Probably something on the King Crane Commission in 1919 that we're going to talk about a little later.
Yeah.
Something along that exactly, and about sort of the American politics of sympathy. But I'm still trying to flesh out that argument, to be honest. So I can't give you a coherent answer, but certainly it's something to do with the First World War and what comes out and the politics and the culture that emerge after.
Awesome. I can't
Yeah.
wait to read that when
Thank
you
you.
decide to publish it and get that
Thank you.
argument sorted. Well,
Thank you.
again, thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me and for this interview. Yeah, thank you so much.
A pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.